Here.
Jim Jinks.
Here.
Don Walsh.
Here.
David Belliver.
Here.
John Mylone.
Here.
Fiona Pearson.
Here.
Tricia Kramer.
Here.
Greg Wolf.
Here.
Dina Allard.
Here.
Everyone's present.
Thank you. Please join me in the pledge. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We're going to slightly rearrange the agenda tonight and move or start off with item 4, which is the discussion regarding CPS Central Office in Alternative High School. And I see we've got slides from a PowerPoint, so I'll turn it over to Dr. Solon, and the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. It's great seeing everybody this evening. It's been, I feel like since last spring, but time flies when you're having fun. And so when Sean and I spoke earlier this week, or last week, end of last week, about kind of giving this quick update, I realized that the school modernization process has been really a decade in the making, and that some of you have hung on every single word, and some of you understandably haven't been connected through that decade. And we just kind of wanted to reset everything, just to, not a deep dive. This is a very superficial, but like, where have we been, and where are we now? And if Sean could advance to the next slide, the School Modernization Committee back in April of 2021 identified a couple of 2-3 phases in a more comprehensive school modernization plan. The first phase, of which we are in kind of the middle of at this point, was the construction of 2 K-6 elementary schools. And I still get asked questions from people who maybe weren't there from the beginning about, like, why did we go with elementary schools first? You are probably aware that we've had a real boom in enrollment that impacts our K-6 population most dramatically at this point, with the projection for it to matriculate up and increase. And to the point, we're over 900 students at Highland School. We've had to add portable classrooms. We're managing that curve, and we'll be able to redistrict when we do ultimately open up these 2 new buildings in 2026. We're going to take the existing Darcy and Chapman offline. Norton, as you know, will be demolished when the new building is constructed right behind it. And we will be redistricting. That hasn't been finalized yet. You're obviously aware, North End, there's a lot of construction going on. All that stuff will be taken into consideration when we do ultimately redistrict some point, probably early next year. So that's phase 1. Phase 2, and there were no dates, as you noticed, put on any of this, but phase 2 and 3, in the specific order, can be modified. Like, it was just, we know that additional work needs to take place. Renovations to Doolittle and Highland is K-6 schools. Highland is still our youngest school, if you will, built in 1971. Doolittle will be the only school without heating, updated heating, ventilation, air conditioning, if we don't do anything about that. And the money has already been dedicated for our efforts in an energy performance contract, which will be part of the consideration for HVAC upgrades at Doolittle. The money's already been dedicated for a design plan for HVAC at Doolittle. So I think we're in the process of getting there at Doolittle, which would mean that in 2026, hopefully, or thereabouts, all 4 elementary schools will have updated heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. And that's also relevant because the state recently passed a law last session that there are heating and the temperature tolerances for which students can attend school. You just saw recently in Wallingford, they canceled school at Lyman Hall for a number of days because it was too cold. And the same thing can happen when it's too hot. And we've done early dismissals to try and work through that. With the law, that may not be as flexible an option. So it is important to address those HVAC needs. The renovation to Dodd or the high school, Humiston, those things were just kind of left relatively open-ended. What are we going to do with those? And they, I think, kind of punted, if you will, to say the next iteration of the School Modernization Committee can make determinations as it relates to those buildings. So the school building ages in use as it stands today. Humiston is 112 years old. It serves as our central office and alternative high school. Vin's going to provide some more details. Darcy, Chapman, and Norton on this list will come offline. Those are some of our older buildings, dramatically kind of reshaping the age of our schools on average, but we'll have, in that case, brand-new buildings and buildings that are really still quite dated and in need of repair. The other element worth pointing out on this slide is that we don't have a community park and rec, or the schools serve as the location for all of our evening activities. So as the community, and so the buildings aren't just used on school days until 4 o'clock. You know, the buildings are used really quite regularly, and you'll see in the right-hand column of this table, this is a historical typical number of after-school events in each building. I mean, 2,532 different events at Cheshire High School over the course of the year, and it puts miles on the place, and additional demand on heating, ventilation, air conditioning, et cetera. So the facility use is a major topic. You probably remember, not just inside but outside last spring, a number of articles about access to fields. As our elementary age population grows, we've got a lot more kids playing soccer, softball, et cetera. The soccer folks were regulars at our school modernization meetings. And so that demand is still there, and you know, certainly applaud the town for the efforts at Bartlam Park to help update that. We've grown and we've really done some nice stuff, and the new schools will continue that process. On the next slide, what you'll see is what our profile will look like in 2026 when we bring new schools online, and you know, the town at that point obviously will have decisions to make about Darcy, Chapman, and Norton, and the potential revenue opportunities that exist to help defray the costs of any other maintenance or construction that we want to do as a community. I think there's a real opportunity there, in addition to other opportunities such as legislation around reimbursement rates, for example. So, Sean, if you don't mind advancing another slide after this one. The next couple of slides take a look at what our capital budget requests are for the buildings. And one thing that we neglected to include in here was like a before our efforts to build 2 new buildings, because although it doesn't look at by scale here, the pie was larger, and it included some heavy-duty pieces for Darcy, Norton, and Chapman, which we've been able to, you know, avoid through the construction of 2 new buildings. Vin?
I don't really have much to add to council members, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for having us this evening. The slide that's up on the screen now is just our capital budget by category. I didn't put the dollars on there, but the capital budget request that we presented to the council in earlier this year was $55.8 million. So the pie chart represents $55.8 million worth of work that needs to be done in the schools. Sean, if you could just flip to the next slide. As Jeff mentioned, The 55.8 million doesn't include anything for the schools up on the top there, Chapman, Norton, Darcy. For obvious reasons, those buildings are coming offline. But it also doesn't include anything for central office in Humiston, because we know that what we're going to do in those buildings needs to be visited. So if we were to add, and you'll see in the last slide that I'll talk about, the central office in Humiston, just to get us ADA compliant and make some improvements to the, exterior and interior of the building. The price that we had to do that back in 2017 was $5 million. It's obviously escalated since then. We haven't done a recent estimate or pricing, and I think, the point that I would make this evening is anything that we want to do for Humiston and central office, which we do need to do, is going to need some further study. We have some elements, which I'll show you at the end, of the initial work that we started doing, but now we need to complete that work to make the decision on what to do with central office and Humiston. And the only other piece of information to add, the council approved last year the town and board buildings to conduct an energy performance contract study. The RFP was issued. We are having a proposal meeting with the prospective companies that will provide an energy service contract tomorrow. We'll do some site visits with the proposers. It seems like there's 5 interested, which is pretty good. We'll do those site visits in November, December, and December 19th, I believe, is the date that proposals are due back. So there'll be more discussion around that. The reason that it's relevant here is some of the work that we would do under the energy performance contract would be work that's on our capital budget. So it will be removed from the capital budget if we finance it basically through an energy performance contract.
This is my Instagram. My followers demand when we're meeting with the council.
Okay.
Kept appraised. Anyway, the next slide really just speaks to our educational priorities and the needs. These were identified when we initiated the whole process for the school building committee, going back before the Next Gen School Building Committee. This was the original School Modernization Committee. And I'm only sharing this slide here in particular because, it's like when I tell my son to clean up his room that's an absolute disaster area, and he makes his bed, and it's like, yeah, we're all set. And it's like, well, I appreciate it is a massive step forward, but there's still a lot of work to be done. And in our case, we are taking a massive step forward as a community, massive. And, I'm just reminding us that, in the next slide and the subsequent slide, there are a couple of pictures that, are illustrative of there's still work to be done. And I think one of the things that we really appreciated about that last process, and Sean, you can advance through the next couple of slides, but what we really appreciated in that last process with the School Modernization Committee was that we worked really collaboratively between the board, the council, and the individuals who are appointed to be part of that committee to find an economically feasible strategy to try and move forward. And I guess I should include, not I guess, I know I should include our representatives in Hartford as part of that. And I would just, remind everybody in the community that, we've made some substantial strides, and I think it's worth continuing to look at how do we continue to move forward and what makes economic sense for us as a community. We remember the town council meeting many years ago where the new middle school was rejected, but there was a unanimous agreement, regardless of party, that we need to take steps to improve the school system. And we've made massive strides. I can't say that enough. But it doesn't mean all of our work is done. And I think I just want to, again, encourage both the council and the board to come together, and I know we will, to talk about, all right, what would make sense in next steps. And part of that next step is the question that revolves around Humiston being 112 years old. There's a really incredible document that we have, the handwritten town notes from when the original money was donated to create the Humiston building back in the day. It's these cursive notes that were taken, and the money was donated by the Humiston family for educational use of that building. When we consulted with the state many years ago about that property and what can and should be done with it, it was clear that they said to us, there's a process, but that building is clearly exhausted its useful life, and it no longer needs to be used for educational purposes. Because of the substantial ADA issues that exist there, it's not like you can easily turn that into apartments or anything, but, you know, the land, the property, you know, can go in a different direction. And so, as Vin mentioned earlier, we have already began looking at what use is there between the alternative high school and central office, what sort of space is demanded in that property. Not that it's got to be square foot for square foot at all in a different location, but it gives us at least a general sense of what we're looking at. So Vin, you want to walk through, I know it can be pretty tough to see here.
Yeah, this is a real eye burner, but right now, central office occupies a little over 10,000 square feet, and our alternative high school occupies a little over 8,000 square feet. So if we were just looking as a general statement to replace central office and the alternative high school, we're looking in the neighborhood of, you know, 18 to 20,000 square feet, you know, on the high side. You know, by planning space more efficiently, maybe you could get it down to 15 or 16,000, but that's the range. You know, it's not a large space, but it's not a small space either. And obviously, the alternative high school requires classrooms and, you know, some other learning type spaces. So, you know, we only included this so you get a sense of how big a space are we currently occupying when we look to replace it. And then the last slide, this is the framework that we started to work through for the School Modernization Committee. So this dates back to 2020, but the parameters on the left side of this still apply. So these are the things that we would consider as part of the decision whether to stay or go. You know, first is annual operating costs. Even though that's an old building, you know, the walls are pretty thick, so it has some pretty good insulation. It costs us about $85,000 a year just to heat and run that building, pay for utilities, keep the building clean. That doesn't include any major maintenance repairs, but that's just to give you a sense of, you know, what it costs to operate the building currently. It's paid for, so we don't pay rent to the town, so that's a good thing. If we were to consider other options, whether lease or build or purchase something, you know, obviously that would change the financial operating costs. So that second parameter is just identifies what I just said, except on the right side of that parameter, you know, we were carrying in our capital budget, and as I explained earlier, it's no longer in there, but we were carrying about $3.5 million for ADA improvements at the building. And Perkins Eastman's estimate from 2017 was $5 million to go beyond ADA and just make further building improvements to the interior and exterior. So there's several $1 million to stay in the building if that's what we decide to do. From a compliance point of view, what I did want to mention, because of the way there's actually two separate buildings connected by a corridor, we would actually need to install 2 elevators to make it ADA compliant, one on each side. There's no way to bridge that gap, unfortunately. The floors don't line up. The next item is, you know, what would it cost to either repurpose Humiston or to tear down the building if that were the decision. And then, it's important to note that, the building itself is considered is in the historic district. It's on the National Registry of Historic Places in New Haven County, and the Humiston family still does live in town, is our understanding. There is still a trust that is managed of the Humiston family, so I think that's a consideration that, we would all, want to be sensitive to. And then, the quality and functionality of the space, we know that Humiston building, just because of its age, especially on the central office side, it's kind of choppy. It's not the greatest space, but we make it work. It's functional. We have a boardroom. We have, 2 small conference rooms downstairs in the lower level that we use. And then the rest of the bullets talked about, it is a centralized location to have it, have the building there. And when we prepared this, we were talking about, could we add on to the new North End facility and move central office in Humiston to that facility. So that's why the proximity is on this particular stay versus go matrix. And, really that's kind of the high-level points that we, would take further as we continue down this road to discuss what do we do with central office in Humiston. And I don't know if there's anything, Jeff, that you wanted to add.
I'd just
to
say, with respect to Humiston, Vin gave just a cursory overview of what the updating would cost there in 2020 dollars or 2017 dollars even. And, when we look at it, I think as a community, the potential to use commercial space, or you're taking potential tax revenue off the market there, or existing space that's not commercial in nature. What's the cost of making that space appropriate for our needs? That's stuff that would have to be studied by a professional who knows, what they're doing. This is some of these things like proximity, we could easily determine collectively, but things like space and cost are not necessarily within our wheelhouse. So that just kind of gives you a quick overview of some of the considerations, where we are. I'm not sure, I hope that kind of helps answer some questions, but we'll certainly entertain any questions anybody has.
Thank you both. This is helpful as we begin kind of the initial process of looking where we're going to be 2 years from now. So 2 quick questions before I turn it over to my colleagues. First, regarding Dodd, capacity and needs. We're in the process of building the 2 new elementary schools because of the population of our elementary schools. Is it spread out enough over K through 6 that there's not going to be a huge burst that would go into Dodd in any one year? Or is there something that you're looking at that says, wow, with this class of current second graders, that in 5 years, that's going to hit Dodd, and that's going to kind of put us in a bad situation with the middle school?
Sure, great question. There's not a bubble that we see today that would break that, but you drive down 691 and you wonder, what could happen. But the demographers don't foresee such an influx in those condos and apartments that it would break us. I was principal there. We had 900 students, and currently we have a little over 600. There's room for growth, but one of the challenges there is that the infrastructure was built for the 600 student setup. Then the or Park Place addition was made that brought it up to be able to, you know, bursting at the seams, 900 students. So it's not really built for 900, but it could, under those conditions, accommodate 900. But we're not foreseeing a bubble that would get to that place in the projections.
And Mr. Massiani, you mentioned a word that made my ears perk up a little bit, and that was trust. The Humiston Trust, is there, by any stretch of the imagination, ability to talk to the Humiston Trust about some ADA compliance issues with Humiston?
That ability exists. I don't know any of the details of the trust, but, you know, I certainly can make some contacts. You know, one of the gentlemen that works over at St. Peter's, I believe, is a member of the board. So, but beyond that, I don't know what the capacity is of the trust, nor what they do with it, but could ask.
Yeah. Or, you know, and maybe we can talk offline about, you know, reaching out, having an initial contact, whether it be the town, whether it be, you know, BOE or central office, or it's a combination of individuals that, you know, it may be worth,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. What we didn't talk about, just on the topic, is, you know, would there be reimbursement from, in the form of a school construction grant? You know, because the alternative school is a school, that, my assumption is that it would be eligible for full reimbursement. I believe the central office space would be a reduced percentage reimbursement. But, so that $5 million number that I put out there, that's gross. We would have to explore what the net would be.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to my colleagues. Anybody?
So first of all,
No. Everything.
thanks, fellows, for doing this. This is very helpful information. And my biggest concern overall with this, Peter and gentlemen, is, you know, you're looking at it from one perspective. We're going to have to look at it from a global perspective as to the impact on the residents of the community for whatever we spend, and we're spending big dollars. I'm happy we're doing this. Sean's not in the room right now. I'm looking, Peter, to get some guidance as we get into this as to what the type of expenditures we're looking at are going, how they're going to impact our residents in terms of increase in taxes, et cetera, because I don't want to do this just because there's a need without considering the impact on the community, because it's a balancing act, as you know.
Yeah, and I
So-
think I mentioned, you know, the fiscal awareness part at least a half dozen times, John. So
I know you know that.
to be
I'm just-
fair, I mean, we are sensitive to that, and I didn't come here and say we need to build a new middle school tomorrow. You know,
No,
with
exactly.
I think we need to continue to work together with that. And it's a critical piece of the puzzle. Absolutely.
So,
Just before, if it's okay that I interrupt you,
Of course.
just while we're on that topic, if you remember from the meeting, you know, kind of the big meeting we had to talk about the next generation school and where we're going, when we had our joint meeting with Board of Ed, I think the way we left it was that we were going to give them the ability to go back, understanding that this is a lengthy process, like it was that brought us to the two elementary schools. And all of that stuff is taken into account, and, you know, what the demographics are, what the impact is going to be of all the building that's been going on in town. So, yeah, it's not something that's going to be decided soon. It's probably several years out, but yeah.
no, thanks, Peter.
And that's absolutely, you know, there's no question, what is the appetite of the taxpayer going to be, and when is their appetite going to be ready for the, you know, kind of the next step of modernization, so. I think your point is very well taken.
And there will be growth that's going on in the community that will offset some of those expenses, which is, and we'll just have to assess that as it goes forward. I will say, just anecdotally, I mean, I know studies will show that apartments, particularly one-bedroom and two-bedroom apartments, will generate less school-age children, so hopefully there won't be an impact there. I'm not an owner of any apartments in the community, but I'm related to some of the apartments, and I'm seeing firsthand people coming to the community for the schools and bringing children here.
Don't
You
make
guys-
me say it in front of Sean.
You guys are
Again.
doing, it's almost like, could you not do such a good job maybe once in a while, so
Yeah.
we don't keep on drawing people here? I mean, people
I
come from
appreciate it.
Florida, California, from all over the country, finding Cheshire and coming here to put their children in school. So congratulations on the reputation really being.
Well, thank you
out there.
guys too, because, the funding and the support that you provide in word and in dollars makes that possible. And so it's really a collaborative effort, and people don't move here for the nightlife, Sean. Like, you know that. One day, we're getting close, and Byron gives me a hell of a run for my money right now. But with the North End, I could be in trouble.
And then just a couple other things. I saw the pictures of, leaky roofs and stuff. Those are just isolated things, I assume, right? We don't live with those.
No,
Okay.
yeah. We
I'm not in
repair
the schools regularly, but
things that, thank you, that's fair. We do repair those things. I mean, the one thing that is a permanent condition is the next slide with the young man walking up the stairs on his crutches. I happened to walk in on that one day and was disturbed and took a picture. That's at Humiston School, and that young man made the choice. We could have relocated, but it's tough when you come in on the school side of Humiston. You either got to go upstairs or downstairs. If you come in through the side door of where our Board of Ed office entrance is, you can go down a ramp. And we would have moved the class downstairs. And he's like, no, I don't want to do that. This is just easier. But it was a reminder. And the garbage cans there are no choice there. I mean, our building maintainer carries them up the stairs every day to the third floor to take care of the trash. I mean, he could make 17 trips up and down, and there's probably a point where he should start to consider that, but that's what we're doing.
So Humiston, there's no question, ADA is a challenge, and I just, as we look at Humiston and we look at the alternatives and whether or not that's the right alternative or not, I just, from my perspective, is that it's an important building in the center of town in terms of the quality of the community, the quality of the downtown, et cetera. It's nice that we occupy it because we maintain it and we control the beauty associated with that and how much it contributes to, the ambiance of the center.
It is a stunning building, and I like it. It looks beautiful from the street. There's certainly limitations, but, I was saying to Vin, right now, we have kind of an elevated reimbursement rate on refurbishment, too, not just new construction. And, whether or not the state would honor that on an 112-year-old building would have to be discussed with Department of Administrative Services, I would think. But, there is still maybe a bit more urgency given that number.
Yeah, and not as it relates so much to whether it continues to be used for your purpose or another purpose. Just want to be really careful of what we do with that building going forward, not just say, well, we don't need it anymore, so, because it is a landmark, and it is an important landmark in the community.
Wouldn't look good as a car wash or something, with all due respect to car washes.
Anyway, thank you for the information.
Thank you.
Mr. Walsh.
Thank you, guys. First, I just happened to look up the Julia Humiston Trust, and their total assets right now are $141,000. I don't think we can get too far with ADA compliancy with any of that money, so unfortunately, that's probably not going to be an option. And this has always been one of my cries for the many years I was on the school modernization and on the council about ADA compliancy, and it's more than time for this town to get with what's going on. To remind everybody, ADA is not a choice, it's a law, and we can't keep pushing it down the road any further. You know, and, you know, the $3.5 to $5 million to bring it up to code, I mean, that's a lot of money. Or we look at that money and find some alternative space that we could use that for. I do think, I mean, we have to remember that that school, I think, is zoned for residential anyway. So, I mean, if it goes offline and there's another place, there is a possibility that that could become a residential, a very nice residential community that I have seen, you know, for seniors or something like that, where that there have been many cities and towns around the country, especially here in the Northeast, with old school buildings that have been converted to senior housing and housing for, you know, people who, you know, we all know that there's people who live in this town, who've lived in this town for many years, and they're getting pushed out because of the costs. And it could be a way to keep some of those people in town. So there's a lot of options, I think, for that building if we find another alternative for you. But I just want to make sure that we look for what you guys are asking for. And I appreciate you telling us what you have. And you say you don't need, what, 19,000 square feet. You could probably do it with 16,000 if it's configured the correct way. And I think sometimes we need to think out of the box and figure out, okay, if we can find a place for a set amount and put so much money in, and if we can get reimbursement from the state for the renovation, then perhaps we can find something. But I think it's high time that, you know, we find a better space for our Board of Ed and for our alternative high school. I mean, I think it's, you know, the times I've been in that building, it's, you know, we use that picture to help get the two elementary schools. And I said, it's funny that we use that one picture of the kid crawling up the steps, but that's the one school that we're going to keep online for now. And I think it's, you know, it's something that we really need to consider as the part of the next phase. I think it should be one of the first things we do. And if we find a space or something, we should really look at these things. So, thank you.
Ms. Kramer?
Hello, thanks for coming in again. I feel like we see you guys a lot, and we're probably going to see you guys a lot more over the next few years.
That's not a bad thing.
Not at all. I just wanted to say thank you for all that you're doing. My kids and my family are directly benefiting from the amazing education that they're receiving here in Cheshire. And the new niche ratings came out recently. Have you guys seen them?
I think we did okay.
You did stellar, and I believe every school in Cheshire now has an A or above rating, which has not always been the case. I don't think anybody went below a B, but all A, and I believe Cheshire High School is ranked 17th in the state, which it's just going to keep growing, and they rate them on all different categories. Yeah. And I believe our lowest scoring category, unfortunately, is like our multiculturalism. But, so that's going to keep bringing development to town, because that's why I moved here almost 10 years ago, and it's only gotten better. So kudos to you. Thank you for that. And it is time to, you know, move on with the maintenance phase of Phase 2 with school modernization. Vin, you had mentioned something about reimbursement, state or federal. You said full reimbursement for Humiston. Are there certain definitive factors for that?
There are, and what I was saying is that our reimbursement rate for, in this case, it will be a renovation, is 50%. In our case, because of the legislation that was passed, it's the same as new construction. Now, as Jeff said, that's going to be subject to approval by the state, and they will look at the age of the building as a factor. So the Humiston School side, which is about 8,000 square feet, we could get potentially the full 50% reimbursement.
Okay.
What I was getting at is the central office side, it's reduced from the 50% because it's not school space.
And that reimbursement rate, is that statute? Because I know Connecticut as a state is coming into some really interesting budgetary waters over the next few years because of ARPA and all sorts of funds are changing. And Is that number definitive, or does that fluctuate over time?
Well, there's special legislation that was passed that set it at 50% for Cheshire for the next 20 years, I believe,
That sounds statute to me. Awesome.
unless repealed, so we always throw that caveat in there. But yeah, it is set legislatively for Cheshire,
For 20 years.
yes.
That's awesome, because
Probably
50 is a great
17
number.
left, I think. But who's counting?
The clock is ticking. It took 10 years to get to where we are now, so, but it should go faster from here. And my last statement I wanted to make was piggybacking off of what Don said with the ADA compliance. It's so incredibly important, because there are days when I can't use stairs. And I'm not alone in that, and there are some, and I'm lucky to have some days where I can. If you were to have students or employees in that building, you're actually affecting their livelihoods, their life experiences, and I think that's, yeah, it's something we've been discussing for years, because I've been taking part in school modernization for 5 or 6 years now. It needs to be addressed immediately.
To Don's point, it's not just problematic, it's illegal.
It is.
And so, you know, Chapman was a very similar situation, and we've removed that problem, right, with the as of 2026. And it's-
Humiston doesn't have the availability of just reorganizing or,
Yeah, I mean, we do. I mean, we do accommodate people who aren't able to navigate the stairs. There is a ramp to the lower level, and we'll move meetings down there. But to your point, if it was an employee, we'd have to move their office space down there or something.
and any meetings, and any time they have to be involved in any type of,
Right.
all right, thank you guys so much.
You're welcome.
Mr. Jinks, do you have anything?
Was that to me, Peter? Sorry.
Yes. I just wanted to give you an opportunity, Jim.
I do have a quick question. I think Trish was starting to get into it, but so with Humiston, what sort of accommodations are we able to kind of manufacture for people that are not able to climb the stairs or use the building?
So, I mean, if we've had students who are temporarily, unable to navigate the stairs, we've had them come over to the Board of Education side where there's ramp access, there's sidewalk access to the building, and then ramp access to the lower level. There's also ramp access to the lower level at Humiston School, so we could rearrange rooms there. It's not something that's happened with significant frequency, but, and it's always been temporary in nature. And when those things arise, we accommodate them. But it is not the same as having a building that's fully accessible, obviously.
Right, sure. And then, sorry, I forget the other question I had, unfortunately. If somebody else has a question, go ahead, maybe it'll come back to me.
Mr. Walsh?
And just one thing, knowing people who have disabilities, they don't want special accommodations for them. They feel that there's enough attention drawn to them because of their disability, whatever it may be. So I think, people have to understand, yeah, it's nice to make accommodations for these people, but they want to try to flow with the rest of the people, and I think that's what ADA was written for, and I think that's something that we should understand. I did have a quick question, though. The roof at Humiston, when's that due, or how is that?
Well, it's a slate roof, and we do have it repaired when it needs it. It's not leaking currently, and we hope it continues. There's no large trees overhanging that roof right now. That's typically what, puts an end to a slate roof. So it's got to be done at some point, and when it needs to be done, we would have to go to the Historic Commission to get approval with the replacement, whether we do slate or something comparable, which is much more expensive than shingle, but we're not there yet. And again, we don't have, funding in the capital budget. We had pulled it out actually a couple of years ago, but that is something that's hanging out there. I didn't want to use that word, but yes, it's hanging out there, along with a bunch of other things that, we're discussing tonight, and I'm glad we're discussing this. There's no argument about the importance of making the upgrades, including the ADA compliance, but it's kind of a complicated decision, because even if you said we're going to move to another space, well, what are you doing with the existing Humiston building, right? There's considerations there, and you may have to, if you want to keep the building, you're going to need to improve it anyway. So, I hope that we go down the road of doing the study and making some decisions.
Yeah, because, to, I think, reinforce everything that we've talked about tonight, to work collaboratively between the board and the council, maybe even appoint, as was the case last time, people who could dedicate their time to this. They'll develop a prioritized plan. We'll look at what the funding circumstances are. I mean, that takes time to develop the plan. It took over a year last time. You can develop the plan, or they could develop the plan, and we'll have a much better sense in 2026 about, what does our enrollment look like? What does our economic development look like? What does the forecast economically look like for the state of Connecticut? Those things are all pretty favorable right now. Maybe they won't be in 2 years, but we'll get a sense of, what some of those costs might be and what some of those options might be. And ultimately, if this body feels that it's prudent, then it could go before voters for referendum, who will ultimately make the decision. But I would advocate that we do continue to explore and look at, particularly given the fact that there is an existing timeline on an elevated reimbursement rate. And I say that not just thinking that the clock might run out, but also looking at, is there an opportunity to make an adjustment to that?
Mr. Milone?
Peter, I remember what I wanted to ask now. I don't know if anybody asked the question.
Let's go to Mr. Jenks, and then we'll come back down the line.
I have a hard time seeing everybody, so. One thing I wanted to ask was about the alternative high school itself and how well the building is kind of functioning for the alternative high school, as well as, are we seeing an increase or a decline in the number of students that want to attend that school? Or, and what's the general status of the alternative high school?
Yeah, so it's not, that's not like necessarily a school of choice per se, where we say, open enrollment or anything. That's, tailored to meet individual student needs. In most cases, where a large comprehensive high school can be overwhelming for some students, we tailor a program that's more independent, or more intimate, I should say, at the alternative school, so that it's appropriate. And, so it is a smaller number of students who are on a variety of different programs, probably no more than 40 at any given time over the last, 5-6 years. So it does work for that population in terms of the square footage.
And the space is kind of more or less working as well for them?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Start with Mr. Milone, and then we'll come back, because I know Ms. Pearson and Ms. Allard have questions.
I know I said we would be careful about how we go about this, but as I'm listening to this conversation tonight, and particularly what Don said and how he responded, et cetera, it does seem like the Humiston building is kind of a critical situation that sits by itself. It's not contingent upon decisions on the other schools. It may be contingent upon using other school buildings that are becoming available. I don't know, that may or may not be usable for that purpose. But it seems that with the concern for handicap accessibility, we should focus on deciding if we're going to stay with Humiston or not, and try and make a decision sooner than later. Then we can at least begin to plan on improving that building so it's safe for everyone. And if we're not, then we can look elsewhere. But that decision, I would think, could be made on its own, independent of other decisions relative to school buildings, and probably should be something we focus on sooner than later so that we can plan accordingly. As I hear this, it seems like that shouldn't wait. We shouldn't wait, not necessarily we commit to spending the funds now, but we make a decision if we're staying or we're leaving.
Yeah, I think that's a fair analysis, John, in the sense that, you know, the first time we went through this with the School Modernization Committee, we were looking at what are the district needs, and years removed now from that process, we've got a much better sense. The reason that elementary schools had to be the priority was because we would be putting trailers up all over Cheshire at great expense in, you know, not the most attractive manner to address the population, and that had to be, you know, the priority at that time. Now that that's been addressed and remedied, you know, I think one of the next priorities is ADA compliance, and you know, it's worth studying. You know, if one thing that I would just want to impress on everybody is the value of the collaborative experience between the council and board, whether it's collaboratively appointing members like I remember doing interviews of school modernization committee members years ago with representatives from the council and the board who could then make recommendations to both bodies, and that's all they are, is recommendations, because you can identify really quality people in this community that have passion, commitment, and depth of knowledge to be able to study these things and provide quality recommendations in a way that boards and councils just don't have the time to dedicate. And so it's just, again, the one thing that I really want to impress on the group, how valuable that was, and just encourage you to consider that moving forward.
Ms. Pearson?
Yeah, thank you for that, Jeff. And I echo, I think hearing this conversation, I think this is an issue that needs to be prioritized rather than delayed. It's critical to address these issues, as Don has rightly pointed out and others have rightly pointed out. And that collaborative process is something that absolutely, truly did work this first go around. And so I think starting that process sooner rather than later is something we all ought to consider initiating. And you spoke additionally just about the other schools. I mean, not to neglect the other schools. This is critical. But you mentioned that we need to address these issues of air quality, heating, cooling in our schools. And I believe there may be at least proposals for legislation regarding air quality in our schools. And if we haven't learned anything after COVID, is air quality in our public buildings is key, is so important. And Doolittle, Dodd, High School, these are all buildings that we're going to have to address sooner rather than later. And so the sooner we can begin to really create a concrete path forward, recognizing the financial implications and acknowledging the impact on taxpayers, but we know, again, and said it already, joked about it, that's why people move to our community. Our community rests on the value of our schools. They are our crown jewel, if you will. And so investing that time and energy, I think, is something that we ought to move forward on sooner rather than later. And then the last thing I'll just say is preserving Humiston. That building is beautiful. I think that also is a jewel in our town. And so whatever service it provides in the future, that's something we ought to ensure that is historically preserved in our community.
Yeah, there are a lot of considerations to weigh in anything that we do, and that's why, again, I think people taking time to solicit the various stakeholders in town and get that perspective and try and make some proposals that might make economic sense to people to consider, for you to consider, for the board to consider, ultimately maybe for the voters to consider, makes a lot of sense.
Ms. Allard?
Hello.
Thank you again for coming. Thank you for this
Sure.
information. I really appreciate everything that you do for our town, specifically for my family and my own children. I have a question about the last slide where you reference, should we stay or should we go? You mentioned that the Humiston building is on the National Register of Historical Places. And just out of curiosity, is there any information regarding whether or not renovations to that building would have certain parameters or limitations because of that status?
Well, we know there would certainly be parameters, and, the windows were replaced at Humiston, it was probably 20 years ago. That was not while I was, working at the schools. So that did have to go through Historic District Commission, our local commission, and any changes that we make to that building, including replacing the windows that need to be replaced again, would have to go through the commission. While I have been here, we were looking to, there were a few windows that weren't replaced, and we wanted to replace them, and they're actually the original windows with the original glass, and we were told we couldn't replace it. We'd have to basically refurbish them, as new. So absolutely, there will be parameters, and it will be more expensive to do so. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, right? And because there is, quite a fabulous building from a historic perspective. And it is in good shape, but it needs some TLC at this point.
I'm
It's got
hoping,
a lot of Cheshire High School effect to it. You drive by it and it's got wow factor.
Yeah.
And you walk in, it's also got wow factor for a lot of different reasons.
I'm assuming the ADA requirements and the historic building requirements, that there's no limitations where an elevator, should that be, installed, that there's no, the historic requirements would not limit that from taking place because it's now an ADA requirement.
Yeah, I mean, there's a solution that can be found. I'm not sure what it
Okay.
is. And that solution might be just to build the elevator essentially on the outer portion of the building and cut it into the building. But we haven't gone down that road. But we could certainly obtain that expertise and come up with solutions.
Thank you. I do have one follow-up question as well. Maybe not a follow-up, but you mentioned on this same page the the distance between Humiston and the high school, transporting students back and forth. The proximity of the two buildings is helpful. Can you provide a little background? I wasn't aware that students are being transported. How frequently is that needed? And if you were to move, how far away or how close would you need to be, I guess?
Sure, so students who attend Humiston School are bound by the same graduation requirements as students who attend Cheshire High School. And so there are electives and other coursework that we don't offer at Humiston School and may not be available through online, or it may not be appropriate online for students. And so we do have them go to Humiston, or to Cheshire High. We also share, on rare occasions, staff who go from CHS and teach a section at Humiston School. So proximity there is really helpful. And, some students can drive themselves, but others, we have to provide transportation there. And we do that more often than not with our own personal CPS transportation, rather than the cost of paying for that would be astronomical. The greater the distance, though, and the more time you put in, which is one of the drawbacks of the North End as a site for an alternative high school, it creates economic and logistical challenges.
Does that occur on a daily basis?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
sure.
Ms. Kramer?
Bringing up the historical nature of Humiston, I know a lot of people are really hesitant about involving SHPO in projects, but there is a decent amount of funding that can be resourced through that agency. So I just want to get on the record that when we do, it sounds like we're definitely going to be poking around in Humiston, that we do get SHPO on board and just see what funding is available and what avenues it is. I don't know if they do schools, I'm not really sure, but I know they do a lot of refurbishing, like old industrial areas, brownfields, but historical buildings are definitely in their wheelhouse.
Anyone else? One last chance? Mr. Jenks, you're good? With that, thank you, gentlemen, again, for taking yet another night away from your.
Yeah, but we really appreciate giving the opportunity
Yeah.
to go first. That,
Yeah.
much appreciated. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you
Have a
very
great night.
much.
Thanks.
Good night.
And with that, Mr. Glidden, if you want to come up to the table. Sean, do you want to lead this, or do you want, is Mike gonna?
Either way, I can kick it off. Everyone should have a copy of the RFP, the draft RFP. And thank you, everyone, for making time to meet this evening. We had circulated an initial draft amongst staff and a few council members who had been initially involved in these conversations around multimodal transportation, and we figured, given there were 5 of them, actually it constitutes a quorum if we were to have a meeting, so it just seemed to make the most sense just to pull everyone together and kind of confirm the direction. We had some initial feedback from the draft RFP. I think there's some consistency that we can kind of glean out of this, but we really just want to make sure we're delivering an RFP that meets the scope that you're looking for with the funding we had through the capital plan. And so I think maybe easiest just to kind of have Mike briefly go through key components, but then also allow particularly those council members who reached out to me with a few of their thoughts on some tweaks, some that I think are probably pretty easy to make and were some good suggestions, and a few that just might change the scope just a little bit, and which want to refine that and make sure everyone's in agreement that that is the direction we want to go. So maybe I'll just turn it to Mike for just kind of a brief overview of the RFP and kind of what we're looking for here. And remember that some of this can be further refined and defined once we have a consultant on board. And but we also want to be clear upfront what they're proposing on too. So it works both ways. It doesn't have to necessarily include every detail that we want in the plan, because of course they're there to help us develop that plan. So I'll turn it to Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. I guess probably the easiest is go to page 5, the project overview, and kind of goes over all of the areas. And remember, this was really intended to be a multimodal bike ped plan, where really you're looking at, can you hear me? Oh, sorry. That you're looking at planning from various issues like that. This was not intended to be like a comprehensive traffic study. This would really just be looking at, like I said, going, for example, opportunities, improvement, expansion of infrastructure, gaps of existing network, development priorities, basically looking at your trails, your sidewalks, et cetera. Where does it make sense to connect those dots? Others are just some little things like wayfinding signage, et cetera. But I mean, that really, in that scope on page 5, kind of hits all the main areas. And I know, there was a few comments about a few added bullet points to this list, or clarifying some of those, which I think were very, that those points can be incorporated into this. I don't know, how, do you want to, I mean, really, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, just we left it kind of, I know there was comments that it was kind of vague, but this is really trying to encompass all the various areas without getting too deep into the weeds, because the concern is if we get really deep in the weeds on the RFP, then it reads like we have someone in mind. So then you may not have all the seasoned consultants bidding on it, because they're going to read it and say, they worked with someone to develop this. There's no way we have a chance. So that's why this is, and I use this, so I should back the train up at least. When I was in Simsbury, I was part of the bike ped master plan process there. So some of the goals and objectives that are outlined here were carryovers from that process. I also consulted with my peer in the town of Madison, who is doing the exact same plan right now. They just had it out for RFP. So using those two models is how we approach this, but with some kind of tweaks that can be done to this. We did not make those changes. I know that there's some counselors that have emailed the changes.
Yeah, so I could probably jump in. Yeah, so again, as I said, there were a few emailed comments and suggestions, and I can leave it to folks to kind of chime in themselves, but some of the maybe lower hanging fruit was some, I think both Jim and Greg had asked about adding the expansion of bus lines and maybe looking at where bus lines could go as additional public transportation in town and opportunities. So again, that might be one we can simply add to this bulleted list if there's consensus that you'd like to have the consultants also work on that. I think, Fiona, you also mentioned that. Yeah, so maybe we could just go around, and it's kind of free-flowing if you'd like, just thoughts that you have, other things you'd like to see incorporated. But as long as we leave this with sort of a consensus that that's the direction, that's all we're looking for.
Because I mean, I think what Sean said, the biggest thing that we want out of this is a direction where to go with this RFP and have an understanding of what the council's objection will be for this RFP. Because that was kind of where the two of us were in kind of like a holding pattern, going like, well, which direction do you want to go?
I do want to thank my colleagues who participated and responded and were intimately involved in this process, along, obviously, with staff. But, Mr. Glidden, I think your point is well taken, that we don't want to get too overly specific, because not only for the reasons that you mentioned, but it also may stymie someone from coming up with creative ideas if we narrow the focus so much that, you know, that it's not broad enough. But I will turn it over to my colleagues, starting with Ms. Pearson.
Yeah, so the first thing that I noted, and I realize that busways are an odd one, because that is, it's, like you said, it's not a traffic study per se, but what we've noticed, I don't know if we're like Madison or Simsbury in that way, that we're bisected by Route 10 and then 78, and we see people all the time walking up those roadways to bus stations or bus stops. So, I mean, that would be the only thing I would have us perhaps consider, just because I know that that has been an issue that's been brought up, and we see people walking to and from those bus stops. So it seems to be at least the one dimension that is a little different that we may want to add. But I agree. I think you're wise to keep it generally vague so that we can work with whoever it is we end up working with and hiring to clarify and to address some of those particular key components.
Mr. Walsh, and then Mr. Malone.
Thank you, and I apologize, I just getting my first look at this because I just got it this afternoon. So I know that we had discussed it, but can you explain exactly, when you say bike ped, and now we're adding bus onto that, and I know walking to the bus route, I guess, is ped, but I mean, I just want a better clarification, because like you said, you don't want to get too specific on everything, because you want to get as many ideas from all these people who are putting it in, but.
Yeah, I think really probably the better term to use would be multimodal transportation plan, because you think of it, you're looking at you're doing planning for biking, walking. You're looking at now, if you add in bus service, public transportation infrastructure. So it's like various different transportation kind of buckets that are being included into this.
But does it become a transportation then?
Well, I think what we're calling it is a multimodal transportation plan, so I think that's really where you're going, because it's different modes.
And in Simsbury and Madison, are they doing multimodal as well?
Simsbury was a bike ped master plan. The focus was heavy on biking because it was a biking community. Madison, they're doing a multimodal, similar to our approach.
Well, Madison is, I almost kind of similar. They have Route 1 and they got, what was it, 70?
70.
Yeah.
77.
77, yeah, going through there. So, I mean, they have two big main roads going through there. And I would think, we can gain a lot of information from some of these towns who are doing it. So I encourage you to not steal, but pay attention to what they're doing and make some suggestions. And I think it's good.
Borrow.
Yeah, well, we don't need to reinvent the wheel, but I do think it's important that we do this. And as time goes on over the next 2 years, we all know there's going to be a different type of traffic pattern going on. So that's going to be a different issue going forward. So thank you.
So, Sean, could you remind me what we put in the budget for this? There was originally a discussion of 150.
We have it over we have it over 2 years. I think it was 150 and then 200. I'll pull it up in just a second.
Okay. So I weighed in on this during budget time and to our budget committee, and was very specific as to what I thought was appropriate relative to the funding amount and the scope of the project. And I may be an outlier here, but I'm not comfortable spending the kind of money we've put aside for this, focusing on just multimodal, what Mike defines as multimodal, which is excluding traffic. I mean, the reality of it is, Cheshire's problems are fundamentally traffic congestion problems. And yes, we want to make the town much more accessible for use of bikes and maybe much more walkable. And that should be part of any study that we take on. But if we're going to spend this money and we don't begin to look at and address our underlying traffic issues, they're not going to get solved with biking. They're not going to get solved with walking. They're not going to get solved with mass transportation. It's just naive to think that those modes of transportation are going to help Cheshire solve its congestion problems, particularly with continued growth. And if we use this money and we don't address that, I feel we're doing our townspeople a tremendous disservice, So I'm not comfortable with what the focus of this study is, which is a bike ped study. I don't think that we need this much money to do that. I don't think we should be spending this much money on bike ped efforts without incorporating traffic congestion and automobile issues in our transportation study. This was to be, to me, a comprehensive townwide transportation study, which clearly would focus on alternative means of transportation as well, but deal with congestion, deal with speed issues that the chief is concerned about on secondary roads, deal with how we're going to long-term solve our congestion issues, maybe not through this study, but through looking at significant corridor studies and funding for those studies and putting us in a position to understand what those studies would undertake, et cetera. So, I mean, I spent a half a day responding to this RFP. I'm actually a little bit insulted that not one word of my response is incorporated in this RFP now, and no one got back to me to tell me that they weren't going to take any of my suggestions and they were going to be ignored. Mike, I'm not opposed to what you did here. I mean, I'm not suggesting you personally, but I put a big effort into this because I thought it was important for the community and I thought I had some specific expertise here. So I took the time to write a very specific response to Mike's initial draft of the RFP. And no one got back to me and said, John, we don't care about what you said here. We're going to stick to what we have. Now, there's issues with this RFP, if we're sticking with it, that are very obvious. They talk about renderings and things like that. They talk about going after a developer. It's not a developer. It's a consultant. It's a traffic consultant. So those can be addressed. But I don't know personally what we're doing, and I'm not happy with this approach from my perspective anyway. I think it's not a good use of the townspeople's money.
So if I could just clarify two things. One, in answer to the first question, we appropriated $150,000 in the first year and $250,000 in the second year, both in the category of transportation assessments. And just to clarify, and I do have your response, and Mike and I met to review it, and that was one of the ones I was referring to. There's a lot of great suggestions in there. Our purpose of this meeting was we realized we couldn't circulate those amongst 5 council members without it being an illegal meeting. And so without just taking those and incorporating them and issuing the RFP, we felt there was a need to have everybody back at the table. I think I would love to go through those suggestions right now if we could, just because I think that's the best to make sure everyone's on the same page, that those ideas meet the intended goal of what we're trying to issue. Because it just seems like there's a little bit of a few different ideas as to what we're trying to get out of this plan, that's all.
And I'm fine with that, Sean. It's a fundamental difference in approach, that this is my approach was a much more comprehensive transportation study, which did include alternative forms of transportation, but did not just focus on those at the exclusion of what I consider to be our most significant issues in town, which are congestion and safety issues on our roads.
Okay, I'm going to
Greg, and then Jim.
So I just wanted to clarify, so the 150,000 would just be for this bike ped, potentially bus plan, and then the 250,000 would be for the more comprehensive traffic study? Was that how we had initially discussed those
I think
issues?
that's how we initially talked about it during the capital budget process, but that can be, I mean, we kept it general to transportation assessments. Depending on what the responses are, what the prices come back in, we may be able to do more than we expect with the initial $150,000. It just,
So it would be
it's
taking
all going to
perhaps-
be driven on the scope.
So moving to a larger kind of project than this, but then taking in those capital expenditures from year 2 rather than just what we had put aside for year 1 right now. Because I do recall some of those conversations, and I thought there was some request to actually delay some of the full traffic study until we knew what was going to be happening with the North End development. And once that is underway, then enact, if I'm recollecting those conversations from budget season. And that's why we thought we'd start with this plan, this smaller plan that looks specifically at this bike ped. And I would argue we should add in there bus transportation as well. And then once the North End development is full underway, then enact the fuller traffic study to address all those issues that are incredibly important in our community. I just want to make sure that I'm remembering things correctly there. Not to say that we can't change what we're going to do.
Yeah. Mr. Wolf?
So I agree with John on this one. All of these studies, I think, need to be integrated. I think if we study the bikes and the pedestrians and the buses independently of the traffic, those things all matter together. If we wait to study the traffic in 2 years, what we determine to be the problem with the bikes and the pedestrians now, it's going to change. I am confused also about whether we appropriated money for a traffic study or a bike pedestrian study. I'm for all of it, but we definitely need to determine what goes, in my opinion, we need to do all 3 at the same time. Bikes, pedestrians, include the buses, and the traffic integrated. How we go about that, we need to flesh that out, but I agree with John that we can't just study one without studying the other. They all matter together.
Mr. Jinks?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thought it was on this piece of it that a bike ped plan was probably in the range of, 30, 40, 50K at the most. I don't think we talked about it being a $150,000 plan. That seems excessive. But that being said, yeah, we need to, I think we've always been talking about how we need to consider all these elements together. And obviously the roads, the multiple uses of the road are we can't plan for one and not the rest of them. So I just, like I said, my thought was that this is not a $150,000 project. And also it's the beginning of a plan to make our roads safer and also to address the traffic concerns. It's not just a plan for bikes and walking. It's kind of incorporates everything. Now there may be other issues with the RFP. People are seeing that may very well be true. But I don't think this is a either or kind of situation we're embarking on here.
Mr. Veliber?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Couple things. First, I agree. I didn't think it was going to be this expensive for just this part of it, but I do agree with John and as well as others. I think when it comes to Cheshire, yes, biking and all those things would be nice to incorporate, but we all know the one, probably, if everyone could list a con about the town of Cheshire, I think the number one con is going to be you can't move anywhere, you can't drive anywhere in Cheshire up and down Route 10. So we've got to, that's obviously one of the most important things is figure out how are we going to plan, not only to potentially make it better, but also how are we going to deal with it as we grow, as the 691 interchange becomes even more congested than it is right now, other places moving up and down Route 10. But I guess, so that's something we really need to focus on, whatever planning we're doing, cars, if the cars aren't moving, everything else isn't going anywhere either. But the bigger question I have for Sean is, Sean, in the past, we've talked about this and in conjunction with the COG and other things. And so if I guess if you could refresh my recollection and maybe others, we thought we were going to put some money aside. The chief of police was looking at maybe, had talked about this idea of doing a comprehensive study, but we were also concerned that maybe the COG could do some of it, or they were doing some of it, and they might do like the main strip of Route 10, but then, how does that affect other things? And so I think part of this too was it was being held off a little bit, trying to figure out how do we integrate with what the COG's already doing, so we're not, can we get the best bang for buck by piggybacking off what they're doing and that type of thing. So if you
Yeah,
could
we
sort
had
of
been in
discuss
initial
that.
conversations, we've been in conversations with the COG about assisting us with corridor study, identifying grant opportunities. Mike, do you want to give a little more background as to where
Yeah,
that
so-
stood and kind of has stalled?
We met with COG and their transportation planning department, and basically they were offering assistance to us for a corridor study for Route 10. But that would be based on state and federal funding that they receive through the various buckets of money they get for transportation planning. We were hoping, now this was almost about 18 months ago when we met with them, that money for those studies should have been released in November of last year, and it was not. So yes, while we had that discussion, we kind of delayed it because the COG basically promised us saying, okay, well, Cheshire, we're going to put you at top of the list as our asks for transportation planning, and we'll do a Route 10 corridor study for you. So that would be like, like I said, they're using their transportation planning funds that they will receive for something that has a needed use for us, which then we were going to use as kind of the stepping stone to get into a more comprehensive traffic review after we had that one corridor examined, because although you're not looking at it in a vacuum because they're all connected, you'll have kind of really a comprehensive look of probably the main corridor that you get all the complaints about. And then we can kind of backtrack out from there. But the unfortunate thing is I don't know why, we haven't got an answer to it, why that program has not been funded by the state for the COG, because otherwise we'd have that process started now too.
Thank you, because I think that's important, because, ultimately, if we could piggyback on that and utilize that, that'd be helpful, rather than, us potentially have to do this all on our own. Because obviously the Route 10 corridor and also the Route 68, 78 corridor going side to side is going to be, an important thing. I mean, obviously, as you know, one of the things that all of us, especially anyone who's served on P&Z, will tell you that every project, when it comes out, says, well, it's only 9 or 10 more cars at any peak hour, right? Well, when you have 50, 60 projects over the last few years, that's hundreds of more cars at any peak, but that's not, sometimes that's not always factored into those numbers. So I think it's very important that, when people look at what's coming online, it really does affect more than just, okay, that street and how it interacts with Route 10 or other things. And, and ultimately, the other concern I think many of us have found is that as Route 10 and other roads get more congested, these side streets become the cut through, and some of them become kind of freeways, to get from one side of town to the other. So, I mean, that's also, in my mind, something that needs to be figured out. How do we adjust for that traffic as well? And so, that's something that we need to figure out. But as it goes back to our discussion, in the end, are we really looking at Proposal 1 and a to-be-determined Proposal 2 traffic study? Or, how do these interact? Or is this really going to be one big, or is this request for proposal really should be incorporating that traffic into it as well? Which obviously is a much different request for proposal than what we're looking at now. So I will, I'll leave that out, but I think that's an issue that, it's already come up, do we want to combine those two now and deal with that? Or are we looking at just, biking? Because, yeah, right, as Greg had mentioned, we may have these decisions, but those decisions, how do they interact with our traffic patterns is gonna be a whole different pattern. We can make all the great plans we want for biking and all those other things. Especially, one of the concerns that I have with this is, as biking or other things become more prevalent, right? The roads are only so big and only so wide that we have right now, and especially the most congested ones are already state roads. So there's nothing we can do to widen those, and so that's obviously something that this study is going to say, can we even, with more and more traffic out there, and no offense, more and more people getting frustrated by the level of traffic that there is, are we going to be able to even, we could say, oh, this is great, we're going to bike paths down Route 10, and I'll say, that's great, but I don't know, is there going to be room for that? Is there going to, with the amount of traffic that we have? So I think we do need, if we're going to do it, we do need to sort of put both together, but, that's just a thought. As long as, whether we split it into two or make it one big one, either way, I think they need to be done sort of in conjunction with each other.
Ms. Kramer and Ms. Pearson, Mr. Jinks, and then I'd like to take a little pause to reconvene on this. So we'll start here, there, and back to here.
Some of the things that we're going to run into while we develop these plans are everything is kind of contingent on other aspects of transportation in town, whether it be pedestrian, bike, car, bus. You can really get to a point where you feel like you're trying to boil the ocean. And I think the more finite each aspect of the study can be, it should be. So I do understand the need of all of these having an intrinsic, effect on the other. They still have to be looked at and dealt with separately, with consideration of how they affect the other. Something that Cheshire's dealing with, and I know it's been mentioned a bunch of times tonight, is we are on the crux of some very large development, schools, residential, and, especially the North End development. And I know 10 is a state road. So that adds even more mess into how we have to do our planning. But one thing that I know, and a place that we should focus on, is enhancing use and ease of use of the linear trail. That in itself runs parallel to 10 and can handle, or we can try to have it handle, our pedestrian traffic. I know all ages use it. I know kids use it to get to and from friends' houses, school activities. So we have structure in place to alleviate some of our initial concerns, but getting to the trail for kids or elderly or women with families with strollers is hard. So focusing, I think, on a traffic pattern to and from using the linear trail is someplace that we could put a lot of intent on. And I know the COGS they don't just get specific pots of money at times. They have a myriad of, I just received an emailed list of probably about 20 different services and grants that are coming up for Connecticut towns to use in strengthening for resiliency and sustainability. So add that into the mix as well, because some of the roads that we're going to be working on are, especially over like Ball and Socket, there's issues with flooding, and you bring in those grants as well, and we could get really deep into the weeds. So finding the place to start this so that we can start to move forward on it, I think is something that we should all really get together and, in a timely fashion and decide what's our first step. Let's try and put all of our, thoughts together and start it.
Ms. Pearson?
Just a quick clarifying question. So because I don't know that we've had any clarity yet. This is more like the 40 to 50,000 type of plan that we had talked about in our working group, or is this something that we're expecting RFPs when they come back, that 150 figure that we put out there? What are we?
It depends on the scope of the work. If you want to go to add in what John brought up on traffic.
Just what we have here.
It would depend on the responses we get. in my experience of previously, it was a $40,000 to $50,000 plan, but that was very narrowly defined.
But similar to something like, or
Similar.
maybe a little, okay.
This goes a little beyond what the scope of that work was.
Okay, so we might expect
So
something
we may
more
be
in
a
the
little
60.
bit, yeah, we may be a little over that, but it's not, but then if you want to include all the other aspects.
Then it's-
And then you expand it, yeah, you could get closer to your number, but also, we won't know really how much this is going to cost until we get this on the street and get some responses from some consultants. You could find out that, for example, include some of the traffic aspects into this, and we're getting responses saying it's over $200,000. So, I mean, that's the other thing that you kind of like, as you try to either widen or narrow the scope, that number is going to be a moving target, that for our aspects on planning, do we have money in the budget to afford the plan? Yes. Do I have the exact number? Not yet. And it really, and that's why we wanted to be here tonight to kind of basically hone in the scope.
And just to clarify, if that was the direction that we've decided to go, adding in the additional traffic components, which we can definitely do, if we didn't have money in the budget, you control the budget. We could add to the appropriation if it's, once we have, I mean, part of the idea was, just to the point I think Tricia was just making, trying to get this ball rolling, getting this out on the street, getting a consultant on board who can help us. We're not staffed to provide an in-house plan on this. We need a consultant. There's traffic engineers, there's many firms out there that can do great work and have done this kind of thing for the community, for many other communities. So I think getting that ball rolling, the scope may shift and change once we have a consultant on board, but obviously we want to make sure we're clear with them as to what our expectations are and what they're proposing to us, and pick the one that meets the needs of the desires of the council.
Right, so right now, we've appropriated $150,000 this year for this anyway. So to address some of the points that John may have already, Councilor Malone may have already identified that we wanted to add, and then if it does end up being larger, and it looks like we need to dip into year 2 potentially and increase our appropriation, that's something that we could choose to do if that's a decision that we choose to make. Okay.
Mr. Jinks?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. One thing I just wanted to say was that, I mean, yes, traffic congestion is by far our biggest problem. It's also, I mean, we've only been planning for cars and trucks for decades, really, just like everybody else. You know, so what we plan for going forward is what we're going to get more of. That includes, you know, automobiles, bikes, more walking kind of thing. So I just want to put that thought out there. The other thing I want to ask Mike, and first of all, Mike, I neglected to say earlier, thank you for putting this RFP together and the work that you've done to this point. On the traffic study, do you know, or the corridor study, I mean, is that purely going to show us projected traffic counts, or is it also going to show us ways in which to improve the safety of intersections and, you know, including how to make intersections more bike-friendly and so on and so forth? I mean, can you ask that in a corridor study, or is it just purely kind of, this is the traffic level you're going to expect, this is the pace of that traffic you can expect?
So I can, Jim, maybe this can answer it. I could speak from my experience in Simsbury, where we did a Route 10 corridor study that was financed by CROG, the Capital Regional Council of Governments. That study was kind of a mixed bag of a lot of different results. Some of it was the balance of multimodal transportation, like with the trail crossings that are on Route 10. Others were dealing with the intersections, either sight lines, et cetera, curb cut management. I mean, the list goes on. So, I mean, that corridor study, if it's similar to what previous experience was with the Council of Government study that, like I said, up in Simsbury, it can address multi-modes in that sense, specific to just the Route 10 corridor. So, does that answer your question, Jim?
Yeah, I think so. It'd be nice to know, I guess, what to expect from the traffic study. We've been talking about a traffic study for several years now, and I'm not sure that, at least I haven't seen exactly what the deliverable is.
Mr. Malone, and then Mr. Veliber.
So I had envisioned that whatever we did would involve the bike ped work that Mike's talking about as clearly a priority, because that's something we've talked about for a while. And I think there's an opportunity to enhance the community with that. So I'm definitely in favor of incorporating that in whatever we do. Whether we resolve all of that, Mike had terms in there like engineering. I don't know if we have to, if we get clarity on primary routes and things like that, maybe we don't have them fully designed, maybe at least we have direction as to where we're gonna do it. I'm with everyone else. I love the trail. I don't like taking my bike from my house to the trail. It's the worst part of my bike ride. And once I get on the trail, I mean, I'm happy as can be. And I can ride to work occasionally because I'm not far from Route 10 in either direction. Not many people can. So I'm definitely in favor of trying to do it. But I do think that when I talked about the $150,000 budget, I had envisioned that we would do more than that. The chief's been in here a bunch of times talking about speed on roads and talking about congestion. I think we owe it to the chief to at least address those issues, even if it's conceptually now, not necessarily as album. Look at options, whether we're looking at speed bumps, whether we're looking at speed tables, whether we're looking at I mean, I was in New York the other day, and my GPS told me that I was going to get radar detected every 3 blocks. I mean, so New York, Manhattan is incorporated radar detection everywhere, and they're slowing people down with it. I mean, I slowed down every time I was told, hey, radar detection's up ahead. That may be an option for us in Cheshire as well, to slow down people. So I think we need to explore those things at the same time. And I think the budget can incorporate those in a conceptual manner in a way that we look at everything holistically. Now, we won't be able to do a lot of counts, but we have a lot of traffic information already because we're on a state highway, et cetera. And we would set, I think, objectives for the corridor study that hopefully we get funded by others in terms of what our objectives and our needs are. If we don't do that, then the corridor study won't give us what we want in the end. But if we want a corridor study to make sure it incorporates pedestrian crossings and bike use at major intersections and bike uses on our major routes, et cetera, we can define that as the need of the community. And then when we go to the corridor study, we get that funding, we have a better chance of getting that. So I'm hoping a study like this says, okay, these are the community priorities. What Mike has in here is a lot of public outreach. We'll hear what people have to say. We're talking about our own experiences. I'd like to hear what other people in the community have to say as part of this. So I don't think we'll solve all our problems now, but I don't want this study to be so focused on just one aspect of multimodal that we don't get people to incorporate their concerns and other aspects of transportation in the community. I think we can get that for this budget personally. And yes, the next year's budget, maybe we'll dig down deeper into specific aspects of it based upon the recommendations of a first phase of a town-wide kind of, it could be, multimodal is a fine word, but as long as you don't exclude, automobile transportation from, in part of, it's one of the modes of transportation, so it shouldn't be excluded. So, so that's my own objective, not to not do what we're doing here, but to expand it, to do other things, and have the public outreach. I think it's a good time for public outreach because everything will go from here. Now, I know the state it's hard to control the state. I know the state's retiming the signals all along Route 10 right now. What are they basing it on? I mean, why are they doing it now? Who could figure this state out? But they're doing it right now. So that's something that's going to occur without us having any input because they're ahead of us. It'd be nice for us to get ahead of the state, at least on 6870 maybe, and maybe to a certain degree on any further improvements along Route 10. So anyway, I just wanted to say that one last time, Peter.
Mr. Veliber.
Well, thank you. And my concern, obviously, I just wanted to clarify when we're talking about this is, obviously, the budget for this year is 150. And so, yeah, I thought this was going to be more of a scope to fill that. If we're going to budget for 150, it seems like that would be higher and incorporate some of the things that John had added in. But my big question then is, if we're going to go forward, if we go forward with just this request for proposal as it is, it sounds like that this is not going to be a $150,000 project, potentially. This is going to be more in potentially the 45 to 60-ish range. So that we may have money left over in this for other studies that go with it, or at least other beginning of others. But I just want to make sure that, when we're talking about $150,000, that we're not looking to spend $150,000 on just this. And then ultimately, the question, and if, the other question is, the chief had talked about, having this comprehensive study, and that's why, one of the things we did, I think we flipped this to, if I recollect, one of the things, did we push this out 1 year, Sean, when we did this? Or was it always this way? Was we talked about having the 250 in, let's say, this year's budget, and we moved it out to the next year, or has it always been this way?
No, I mean, it's been proposed over the off and
number of
on over
years.
the last few years. This came out, there was no proposal from the department level, this particular budget. It came out of the budget discussions that we had at the council level. So as it shows in the budget book, it's, it's a 0 request, 0 recommended, but then it's a 150 and 250 year 1 and year 2.
Right.
Just to move, I think, consistent with everything that we're saying here, trying to get the ball rolling.
Right.
And then have additional funding if needed. I think more specifically to what John said about drilling down maybe in one particular area or enhancing or expanding a traffic study or something like that. But I think this has been really helpful, certainly for me, I think, and I think making
agree.
a lot of scope adjustments to this that could be consistent with everything we've talked about tonight.
Okay. Well, thank you, because I think it is important, obviously, if we're talking multimodal, to include multi-modes more than, and how they all interact when it comes to this. So, thank you.
Mr. Wolf?
I just have one more quick comment. I know that Planning and Zoning had requested some money put aside for a traffic study as well. And I just wanted to make sure that some of this, we're aware that the POCD is being written now and how this can inform that. If it can, I know that they had requested money from us to do a traffic study to incorporate into the POCD, into their work. So I just want to make sure that that's not left up.
So
to
And if I could actually jump in on that, just real quick before you do, Mike, only because I think one of the good suggestions that I want to make sure we brought forward that actually John had sent in his comments was the possibility of forming a steering committee with respect to the working and engaging with the consultant and first of all making the selection. And while that's led by a staff effort, probably led by our town planner, it would be good to have a representative from the Planning and Zoning Commission, from the town council, somebody to help participate in that process, just to make sure, this is clearly an overlap between the two elected boards. And I just wanted to point that piece out that I know, John, you had suggested. I thought that was a really good idea to incorporate a steering committee. It's not a town council-driven effort per se. Obviously, it is in funding and in the initiative here, but it is, as we've all said, it's more than just that. It touches on POCD, it touches on planning, and it's important to have, I think, a lot of folks seated at that table as well. So sorry, Mike, go ahead.
And Greg, you gave me a great time to segue into, go to the Planning and Zoning Commission's website right now for the POCD, because one of the interactive polls that is up right now is identifying pedestrian crossings along the Route 10 corridor, which may or may not need upgrades. So in our POCD process, we've already started. That website will be updated regularly. We're going to have new polls up all the time. Documents will be uploaded. But because that process has already started, we're getting response related to transportation as we speak. I could say from spending an afternoon down the road at the Fall Festival, we heard a lot of comments about traffic. I think that the POCD will have a lot to do with traffic. There'll be a lot of conversations about that. But just remember, that's your long-term advisory document that's kind of the big roadmap for the town for the next 10 years. But what it does is, from the sense of traffic planning, it's going to point to issues that long-term that the community may want to address, which will help either A, especially on the state corridors, we'll be able to point to the POCD and say, listen, DOT, not only is it just common sense, it's an issue, but we've gone through a public outreach process. That's what we've heard. We've identified it, and we really need this, whatever this is that's under your control, DOT, needs to be addressed. And it's consistent with the goals and objectives of our plan, which then also could piggyback on to, although this is kind of an independent activity, the POCD, potentially any kind of traffic corridors, any kind of other traffic planning efforts can go into further detail. So it all, although they're separate activities, they all are somewhat interconnected. And the information gathered, like I said, right now POCD has information. We're going to keep going forward. So we'll have stuff that we can share with our other consultant as they develop this based on some of the public outreach that we've already gathered.
I just want to make sure that we're all working together. All these studies are informing
We'll try to
one another.
cross-pollinate
Right. 'Cause
as much as we can.
working in separate silos just seems like a waste of money and effort and,
That's not good planning. I agree.
exactly. Thank you.
Okay, so let's regroup for a minute here. I am absolutely not an expert at all in this area. It was my understanding, as I think Ms. Pearson said earlier, that we would do a multimodal separately from a traffic, but I'm hearing from what I consider to be the experts on the panel. I know that Mr. Malone has participated, Ms. Pearson has participated, Mr. Wolf and Mr. Jenks have participated in various aspects of this. So, and what I'm kind of hearing, at least now, is that bike ped, maybe bus would be about 40,000. We've allocated 150. Do we throw in some sort of traffic study? Does it make sense to do that all together? So I guess, Mr. Glidden, I'm gonna go to you as the expert from staff to say, does that make the most sense based on the fact that we have 150 that we've allocated for now? Do we chunk it out, or do we say, let's throw this all together? And the follow-up to that is, if we do throw it all together, is the timing on this, with understandably all the development that's going on? We talked about potentially waiting to do school demographic studies until we had a sense of what our new demographic looks like and how many school-age kids. So does it make sense to kind of pause and, or do we go forward with planning? Do we go forward with an RFP on a limited basis or on a full basis, not knowing what our traffic patterns are going to be once we get more traffic than we're already dealing with?
Oh, no one told me this is the hot seat tonight. So, I mean, at this point, one thing I would say is that this really isn't a comprehensive traffic study. Really, it's that multimodal study. So I'd almost would consider it like phase one. Expanding the scope to incorporate some of the congestion concerns. Some of these congestion concerns are not just going to be based on your new development that's occurring by 691, et cetera. A lot of it's existing problems. Example being, look at West Main Street and the intersection between Mountain Road and Prospect. The proximity of those lights, that causes an issue. You look at some of the other issues related to congestion, which basically relate to the curvature of your road, the design of your roads, et cetera. So, saying that, like waiting, pausing for all this development is going. I could tell you that the multifamily, the 300 apartments at Stonebridge Crossing, they have certificate of occupancies for the clubhouse and 2 buildings. Every foundation for that development is in the ground right now. They are moving through that development. I would say in the next 12 months, they will be done. So you'll have 300 apartments that'll be coming online in 12 months. Next door, the commercial development, as you can see, the walls are going up for Mercado as we speak. That's the far end of the largest building where the restaurant will be. Whole Foods is supposed to open next Thanksgiving. So all this stuff is coming online. It's all going at once. It's no longer like it's going to be on the horizon a couple of years from now. So I think including some of the comments that have been made about the other aspects that you'd like to see in this multimodal transportation plan makes sense to go forward now to get this out there, because the longer we wait, one, it's just, I just feel like you're just kind of ignoring the problem then, and don't take it the wrong way by saying it like that, but we're kind of like delaying it and kicking the can. So I think now is a great time to start. The other thing too is, like, as John pointed out, the way I wrote this RFP, it's heavy on public engagement and public involvement. We have a lot of interest in the plan of conservation development right now. This would be a perfect time to come in and take advantage of how many people are interested in the community that are voicing their opinions about some of these civic issues. So this could be a very, very robust plan as we use as phase one. Phase two could be the deeper dive where this identifies areas to really look at, and then for the other monies that you have set aside in year two, that $200,000, you could go, okay, we're going to just narrow it down to certain corridors, certain intersections, or certain problems that were identified in the first plan. And then at that point, your development, it's almost at 70, 80, 90% complete. So not only that, if there was some kind of substantive change that affected the traffic patterns, we'd be able to incorporate it in a phase two plan. So I say, if it was, you could tell me, I'm not the voting member here, but I would maybe expand the scope and move forward as soon as possible.
Thank you. Mr. Walsh?
Yeah, thank you. I just had you brought up phase one and then phase two. We're putting out an RFP, though, for phase one. I mean, is it more likely than not that the person who's doing phase one will do phase two? Or do you put out an RFP for phase one, phase two? I'm just not sure how that would work.
Well, I mean, your phase two, the scope is going to be, could be very different than what you're going to ask for in phase one. You may not have a firm that has the wavelength or the capabilities to do the activities that you may be wanting in a more detailed study. So,
So this will just
may or
be for
may-
phase one.
yeah, it may or may not be the same group that does both plans. But like I said, it depends on what you ask for in the next round.
And one other thing, it sounds like a number of council people have weighed in on this. So is it possible to share all their suggestions with the rest of us so that we can see what, I mean, just if you just put them all on one sheet or something, so we can all take a look and see, because like I said, this is the first time really digging into this, and I'd like to see what we're doing here and what others feel would work and wouldn't work. So, I mean, I'm assuming that we're not ready to vote on anything today anyway to move this forward, are we? No, I don't think so either, yeah.
Right, there's nothing on the agenda that
Right.
calls for a vote.
Okay,
but-
okay, so this is
but
just a
there
discussion.
there were becoming, and I know this, I believe towards the end of September, this was sent around to the full council. So this hopefully is not your first look at it. But
Just to clarify, so typically an RFP would be drafted by staff and issued. If we have staff, we put out RFPs for consulting services or anything else all of the time without council approval. We have, in this case, a specific council request that came out of the capital budget. We started this as a staff-driven effort, but there were certain council members who have been asking for updates and what it was going to include, so we had an internal meeting. But just to clarify, it was that meeting, and because there were 5 council members interested, that then prompted the inability to sort of email edits back and forth across to anybody. So again, I apologize if it came across as exclusive in any way. It was not intended. It became more of a council participatory effort than I think we initially envisioned it, and that's great, and that's fine. I think particularly for this, it's career shortening if we're not meeting your needs of what you're looking for. So in this case, this is fine, but our typical RFP process where it's driven by staff, we weren't anticipating a full, a final vote on the issuance of the RFP. We can, and we can certainly do that going forward now that there's been a conversation on this. We can also make these edits and circulate them and maybe just take it from there, and then we can put it on the next agenda if you want to have a vote on the issuance of the final language of the RFP.
Just for my own clarification purposes, and John, I know you said it makes sense to do this all together. Based on what Mike said, do you think we could move forward with a smaller RFP, or would you want to see traffic lumped in at this time, or could that be a phase 2, or?
And if you just wanted to work on bike ped, and I guess you can incorporate access to our, our bus transportation, certainly mass transportation we have. I would prefer that we look at things more globally and we get the process started of defining what our needs and our objectives and our concerns are, and get the public to weigh in on all of those things during this process, and use the money that we've allocated to dig in and not just focus on bike ped. But if you want to reduce the allocation and focus it on just really focusing on a bike ped study, I think that's a need in the community. I don't think that's going to solve the pressing issues of the chief that the chief comes and brings to us in terms of speed and congestion and safety. And I think there's no reason to wait on those personally. I think that's my own opinion.
So, Mr. Glidden, you talked about potentially the smaller, meaning bike, ped, potentially bus, about 40K. We've got allocated 150. Does that get us, does the 150 get us to the full bike, ped, bus traffic level?
It could. I mean, it's gonna, I think if you were to expand the scope, the big thing we'll have to deal with is actually seeing responses. Assuming that we're gonna have responsible firms that bid on this project, we may be able to get everything under budget. So, at least everything in in a phase 1. Because like I said, I envisioning, once you would start with sort of a, I don't want to call it a master plan, but that's really what we're talking about, a transportation master plan, that then you would dig deeper into further details in a phase 2, where that's your $200,000 you have in year 2. So without seeing any responses, there's a possibility you could have all of this included with an expanded scope in one plan.
Peter, if I can weigh in as well.
Please.
I mean, this scope right now is very undefined. It's a very broad saying, look, these are our issues. We're interested in bike ped, and who knows how a consultant will address that. The way I think that I've looked at conceiving the RFP with the modifications I made was still fairly undefined. It's like, these are our concerns. Pretty much you let consultants know the budget, and you see who will do what for the money that's available, what services and what specific, because there's no scope of services provided. We didn't tell, the way Mike wrote this, the consultant to do this, and this. The scope of services, I'm going to do this. It's very specific, and you estimate fees based on those. It's set up so this consultant will come back and say, all right, based upon your expression of needs and desires, here's what we propose to do, and here's our fee to do that. Consultants will fill up the fee they'll use all the fee that they're given. And the question is, what scope will they provide for that fee? I mean, so.
My understanding was that we were trying to keep the language vague so that we could then work with the consultant to determine those particular objectives. Am I understanding that correctly from the beginning? So that's what we would determine once the relationship has begun with our consultant. You see it differently.
Well, I don't want to hire a consultant without knowing what the scope of services is, because then we're paying them for, what are we paying them for? I want to know exactly what a consultant's going to do before they're hired. I want them to come to a presentation and say, this is what we will do for the fee, and not have any question as to what that's gonna be, because then we're not getting our money's worth necessarily.
But then to go back, I mean, there is precedent for this kind of study, because this kind of study has been done, and we looked at the study. I believe, Sean, you shared with us the study from Simsbury, so we looked at that as a group, and so we saw what has been produced from an RFP like this. So we know what can be the product from an RFP like this. And you said right now that Madison has already distributed an RFP very similar to this, and that they have already received responses from, so we know that there are consultants out there who will respond to these types of RFPs with very specific, and we get a sense of the scope from looking at, obviously, we're not going to get exactly what Simsbury has potentially, but there is precedent in terms of what we're looking for. That's, I'm just trying to clarify. Okay.
Just so you compare to other communities, I mean, you got Madison. Madison's got Route 1, which can be congested in the center of town. It's also got 95 that goes right through it. So people that aren't interested in going into Madison go right on 95. They don't deal with Madison. They don't have congestion from people trying to get through Madison to the next town, et cetera, like we do. Route 10 becomes congested because there isn't a close alternative. Yes, there's 84, there's 91, but they're not really, and there's the Wilbur Cross. But I think we're unique from those communities. We deal with congestion that I don't know anyone who's new to the community that doesn't say, my God, it's really hard getting through this town. I mean, everyone I talk to that's, new employees, et cetera, they say, it's nice going down Route 10 until we hit Cheshire, then we don't know what we're gonna deal with,
Right, but if we had this plan to move forward, as we were talking about, and then we can work with the NVCOG regarding their corridor plan, then this is information that they could use, and it would be guiding them to provide us with more useful information on that corridor plan, which is clearly important. Thank you.
Jim, do you have anything? I don't want to exclude you because I know you've been very involved with this.
No, I don't think I have anything to add necessarily. I think that what Mike said earlier about sort of a process forward of this being phase one, it's more or less, I think, what the mobility group had in mind, at least back at the meeting we had back in June, wherever that was. Obviously we have to deal with the traffic issue as well. It's not, I don't view bike ped plan as being completely mutually exclusive from a traffic issue, traffic concerns. It's someone's riding a bike is also part of traffic. And I think the idea is to develop a network of roads in town that people can use realistically as a way to get around town rather than use their car. This is going to be all the time. It's not going to be for everybody. But if we plan for it and we make it safe and a way for people to get around, previous examples of this around the country, around the world, is that you're going to get more people riding bikes, which will have an impact on congestion and safety and so on and so forth. But I don't have any further input as far as how to kind of structure this RFP better necessarily. I would kind of let Mike kind of take the lead on that, but I would hope that we don't hold off. I mean, we've been kind of having this conversation for a while, and also the community is waiting for us to do something about addressing traffic issues, and this seems like a reasonable first step.
That's kind of my concern, is that, we've been talking about this in one form or another for a while now, and I would like to get something moving with some sort of RFP, whether it be just bike ped bus or whether it be full traffic with everything. So I'm certainly willing to entertain some suggestions about that we could at least do a consensus on tonight to give Mike an idea of where we want to go. Do we want to do what was initially intended to be bike ped bus? Do we want to do something more comprehensive? We've certainly got at least a large chunk of the dollars in place to do that. but I think we need to have a consensus of the council. We'll adjourn tonight, and if we need to discuss in November, we can do that. So let's come right down the line and give me some quick thoughts about what you want to do, like, tonight.
I think I've made myself clear. I would prefer it to be more comprehensive. That's I'm not opposed to if we go the other way, Peter, but I would prefer to try and be as comprehensive as possible. That would be my preference.
I agree.
Although you said you sent this in September, I'm just looking at this part now. I thought this just came out today. I don't know. This RFP came out in September? Okay. So anyway, I kind of agree that if we're going to do this, we do a traffic one as well, at least some part of a traffic. But like Greg said, I mean, in 2 years, it's going to change. I mean, you know, our traffic patterns are going to change because you also know that the people in the west end are going to be cutting through Marion Road and Peck Lane to get to the north end too. So I think it's a good start. But I think, like you said, there's going to be a phase two. So I think a little more comprehensive.
I support a more comprehensive, as long as we move quickly. I think your idea of moving and aligning this with, right now, all of that community input with the plan of conservation and development will be key, and that will provide for a more higher quality study. And then we can use these additional monies to dive in deeper into those areas that we believe are important.
It was my understanding during the budget season that the 150 that was allocated for this was going to be for a comprehensive plan that included study as well, so I think that that would make the most sense. But I do recall asking that if that were the case, that whoever is studying that would have the ability to project what may actually be coming down the pike, so that would be my hope.
I am fully in support of a comprehensive traffic study, and we get this going as soon as possible because it's taken far too long.
If this is phase one and the traffic study can be extended past development and new flow of traffic patterns in town with the new development, I'm all for a more comprehensive study in phase one.
Jim? That was a thumbs up. So I think the consensus of the count, I'm sorry?
No, he's still
Oh,
giving thumbs up.
yeah, double thumbs up. So can we, why don't we have staff led by you, Mr. Glidden, put together a more comprehensive RFP? I did not see Mr. Mylone's comments, but if we can incorporate those, were those more of a comprehensive study or for just this study, John?
It was for more of a comprehensive.
Okay, so if we can make sure that we take
Share
a look
those.
at,
I'll share those with the.
Yeah, with everybody.
Again,
That'd be great.
It's an unfortunate reality of meeting by email that
Yeah.
it necessitated not sharing. It was not through any intentional exclusion, just to be very clear.
so, if we can do that and you could draft our more comprehensive RFP, incorporating some of the comments of my colleagues, and if we could have something to look at for November, we could do a discussion and possible vote, because I agree with what I heard from my colleagues, is that sooner rather than later on this is a good idea.
Okay. Could prioritize
Is that,
this.
please push back. If you tell me that's not possible to do, I can live with that, but
No, this is a matter that really, it's been on the burner. It needs to move forward, so I'll put it as a priority. I'll have it for you for your next meeting.
thank you, Mr. Glidden. Comments or last parting words from anyone? Ms. Kramer?
I just want to compliment us on working so well together tonight. It was really good collaborative effort, and thank you.
And with that as the final word, I think it's a good final word. I'll accept a motion to adjourn from Mr. Velaburn, a second from everyone. Ms. Allard? We're waiving executive session. I know it breaks your heart, but we are. So I will call for a vote on the adjournment, and we are adjourned. Thank you.